Don't compare what your price is to someone else's. Yes, market dynamics matter, but someone else may be able to do a job for much less money than you and still make a lot more money than you. One thing that is true is when your overhead comes every single month, regardless of your projects or regardless of your schedule or regardless of what you're getting paid, those expenses are there and you have to pay them. That single mistake I've seen bring businesses not only to an unprofitable project, but I've seen it create many unprofitable projects and years of pain trying to dig out of those situations. So it's important to think about your profit as a percent of margin against that contract number. How do you bid for performance? How do you bid to win? Not only win the job, but win for you and your team and your employees and the goals you've set for yourself. That's the magic formula. Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Mobilization Mindset. My name is Scott Peper. I'm CEO and founder of Mobilization Funding. And today we're going to be tackling one of the toughest issues in construction, bidding. Bidding to win, bidding to make money, estimating, figuring it all out right at the beginning and where it starts. I'm going to share with you the common mistakes and issues we see that have created the most intense problems or just problematic issues that have kept companies from getting where they want to be. If you watch this lesson, you can expect to learn about overhead calculations, margin versus markup, counting your retainage, a little bit about cash flow, but most importantly, what are the issues and mistakes that are created by bidding wrong or incorrectly that ultimately hurt and damage your business. All right, mistake number one. Bidding to win the job without thinking about profiting, or bidding just to win because you think the price of the market is what it is and you want to win the job. Or you're bidding to win the new customer without thinking about the impact to your business if you don't make money. Let's get into it. All right, first and foremost, I'm not going to sit here on this video and pretend that it's not important to sometimes put a lower bid in to win a new customer. What I am going to illustrate though, is if you are bidding one job and that's your only job and you're trying to get a new customer and you do it at a profit point that doesn't even help your business pay for overhead or other items, then you're going to lose and you won't be in business to win that customer anyway. So I do realize this happens. But if you have 10 jobs and they're all profitable and you're trying to, across 6 or 7 different customers, and you're trying to pick up a new one, and in that new one, you're going to get a little skinny so that blended across all 10, when you know all your numbers and you know what your margin and your markup is and profitability, sure, no problem, maybe then. But what I'm talking about is in the beginning, or when your job is so big and you're looking at these jobs and you only have so much time and energy, not knowing all the aspects of the jobs and bidding them just to win it can be really detrimental. And what it looks like is on the job, you didn't realize how much more difficult it was going to be. You factored in some costs that just got missed. You factored in time that was wrong. You now have to look at how are you going to finish this job, and it's going to take away profit from other jobs, or you don't have the appropriate amount of overhead allocation into that job. So the mindset is, let's bid the job to win, but also at the profit you need in order to be successful for your business. Don't compare what your price is to someone else's. Yes, market dynamics matter, but someone else may be able to do a job for much less money than you and still make a lot more money than you. They may have efficiencies built in. They may have different cost structures on their business. There's many ways that companies can do jobs at the same price or less than you might be able to do and still make a lot more money. Bidding mistake number 2, not including overhead properly or debt service into your bids individually for every job. Now look, when you first start out, you're putting a bid in place, your costs are simple. It's just material, it's equipment, it's overhead, everything gets lumped onto the job. But as you grow and you're doing more and more jobs and your business grows and you have different assets and you have different equipment and you own different things, you have leases, you have more employees, you have general staff, your overhead grows, and it is critical to know exactly what your overhead costs are. and how you're going to allocate them to each and every single job. One thing that is true is when your overhead comes every single month, regardless of your projects or regardless of your schedule or regardless of what you're getting paid, those expenses are there and you have to pay them. So missing this as you grow, as you allocate into your jobs and your bid, are some of the biggest problems that we have seen created and cause issues for businesses. That single mistake I've seen bring businesses not only to an unprofitable project, but I've seen it create many unprofitable projects and years of pain trying to dig out of those situations. So let's talk about it for a second. How do you figure out what your actual real overhead is? Well, it starts with the difference between gross profit and net profit. Number one, your gross profit, really simply, is the costs that are associated directly to your project. Not the ones that you put on there, not the layering in the job over it, but real costs, your material, your equipment vendor, your direct labor, your subcontract labor. They're there. But you have to put an overhead allocation in there. And yes, sometimes 10% is enough. But you know what? Most often it might not be. Sometimes your overhead, when you go calculate it, it might be 15 or 20%. It's kind of similar to if you ever tracked your food and you're trying to have a diet, you don't realize how much food you actually eat until you write it all down every day. Well, your overhead is very similar in the business world. Unless you write it all down and you count it all up, you're probably way off and you're probably under how much it actually is. And in our experience, that's exactly what creates the problem. The third mistake is not understanding the difference between margin and markup. So we talked about gross profit. Well, what's really valuable to you is your net profit, because gross profit looks awesome. It's what you hope to make when you're bidding a job. But what you don't realize, if you haven't allocated your overhead and expenses in there, all those other ancillary expenses, which are sometimes your capital expenditures, the one-time expenses in your business that you might not consider, like taxes, not taxes, paying your taxes, but maybe your accounting fees. Or maybe you've had to buy computers for 3 new employees, or you redid the office, or new desks, things like that. Sometimes they're bigger things. Maybe you're investing in a new piece of software. Your net profit is what, at the end of the day, after all expenses, after project expenses and all other expenses, that's what you're going to make at the end. And your gross profit and net profit can look vastly different depending on how you allocate expenses to a project and what your total overhead is. So what's important about margin versus markup is, if you think about it like this, you're paid and you invoice the job at the price that you bid the job at. Keep simple math here. Let's say it's $1 million job. You're going to invoice each month some portion of that $1 million. And then retainage is going to come off of that number. So it's important to think about your profit as a percent of margin against that contract number. And why that's critical is because the waterfall of how you're paid starts at the contract number and it works its way down. So every percentage that comes off of those dollars, like retainage or your expenses or what you're billing against and everything else, is coming from the top contract number down. Oftentimes though, contractors do what they call a markup, which starts at the bottom. You add up all your project related costs and then you add a percentage of profit to that, or a percentage of markup. So if you have $800,000 of cost on a job and you add 20%, for example, that's going to be $160,000. And if you're looking at that as, I'm going to make $160,000. In that case, $800,000 of cost plus $160,000 is $960,000 bid. However, when you take retainage off of that, 10% is now $96,000. It's not 10% of $800,000 or 80. So retainage might be now a much greater portion than just 10% of the cost structure that you thought you had in there. Whereas margin is 10% or percentage of 20% of the contract value. So 20% margin on $1 million contract is $200,000 with the same $800,000 of cost. But 20% markup on an $800,000 job is only a $960,000 project. That 40 grand sometimes makes all the difference in the world. And that's only on $1 million worth of revenue. Imagine extrapolating that over multiple projects and tens of millions of dollars as you grow throughout the life of your business. It is critical to look at margin as a percent of the contract and work your way down. And when you're allocating your overhead into each one of these jobs, along with your project-related expenses, that's when you can now add margin to that number or mark up that number. Include all of your dollars. Then look at that markup as it relates to the contract price, and then look at and see what the true margin is of your business after you mark that up. Your markup, if you do mark up something from cost, just realize that 20% markup on your cost is not equate to a 20% margin. It'll always be less. The fourth mistake we see bidding is not thinking about retainage properly. Retainage, yes, includes a great portion of your profit. It often does. And in the examples we've given so far, you can see that clearly the money in retainage, which can be 5 or 10%, or sometimes maybe even more, of the project total, it's a huge portion. And it's even a greater percentage of your profit on that job. If everybody marks up a job 20% or has a 20% margin, it's going to be at least 50% of the actual money that you're supposed to make at the end of the day. But that's what the mistake is. The job doesn't operate with that cash. So cash flowing the job, you have to look at what your real margin is, your cash flow margin of executing that job without retainage. So that means if you have $1 million job and there's 10% retainage, you should treat that job and execute that job as if you're only going to receive $900,000. Because that's the only money you're going to have available to you to use for your business while you're executing that job and finishing that job until your retainage is paid. So until you're in a much more mature business where you're collecting retainage on jobs completed because you're now 3, 4, 5, 10 years into business and you've been consistently having lots of projects and lots of project completion and you haven't had any mistakes in your jobs and you finish them all and you get paid all of your retainage. If that sounds familiar to you, then please raise your hand because I've never heard of that. But if you have, then sure, count your retainage because there's always retainage coming in your business. But my point is, each individual job, that retainage needs to be looked at as it's not coming for you to execute any work on that job. So you have to operate on that net of retainage. And you have to be able to execute that job net of retainage. Not factoring that in and thinking about it any differently creates massive mistakes for businesses and business owners and their team and their employees. How do you bid for performance? How do you bid to win? Not only win the job, but win for you and your team and your employees and the goals you've set for yourself. That's the magic formula. Here's how it works. 1, it starts with knowing where you are in business. If you're just starting out, then guess what? You have to win on every job and not win the job. You have to win. And win being categorized is, I finished the job, I did it awesome, I got paid, and I made a profit, and I cash flowed the job. That's hard. And you know what? That's why most businesses fail within the first year, and even more fail within 2, because it is the hardest time. Now, it does get harder as business goes on, but you also become more equipped. You also have more friends in the business. You get more talent around you. But in the beginning, it is hard, and it's supposed to be. It's not easy to succeed. You have to make money on every job. As your business matures, you can start to look at things a little bit differently. You want to build those systems and processes where you are going to make money and factor in all things related to performance. So 1, think performance first. 2, think I have to make money. I can't just win this job. Winning this job needs to be categorized as I won the job, I executed the job, and I made money, and I cash flowed the project. And what does that mean? You might not win a lot of jobs. Maybe you lose most of the bids. But the ones you do win, those are the ones that win for your business. And so that means you might have to bid more. That might mean that you're going to have to spend a lot more hours bidding and estimating and staying up late if you're early in the business. Or you're going to have to figure out what your real costs are. Second thing, in order to win, you got to know your costs. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to write down every single dollar that leaves your business allocate it to either a job or project. And if it's not a job or project cost, it is a cost that is factored into overhead. And no matter what that number is, if you can't get rid of any of that overhead cost, then you must make sure you're allocating that to every single job. My best suggestion for you, if it's hard, is do all the overhead costs and calculations and then treat them like they're project costs and add your markup or margin to that so you can know what your true costs are and your true profitability are, and you don't lose sight of real costs. You don't lose sight of real costs and dollars leaving your business and leave you thinking you're actually making money or cash flowing your business when you're not. The last piece of advice I'll give you on bidding to perform and win is simple mindset. And that is, if you're running around talking about revenue and the size of your company in terms of revenue, shift your mindset and replace your revenue number with how much you actually make. Run around telling everyone, instead of being I'm a $1 million company, tell them you're a $100,000 company. But tell them that you're representing how much you actually made. If you say you're a $1 million company, but when you say million, you're actually talking that you made $1 million net income, someone might ask you later, well, what was your top line? I did $5 million. I did $10 million. I did $20 million. Who cares? If you made $1 million, that's what's important. If we were all in the world of collecting a paycheck, you don't ask people what the business made. You ask people what you made. Well, why in the business world, once you become an owner or a leader, do you think about it any differently? Who cares what the top line is? It matters more about the bottom line. That's what you take home. That's what you're able to use. That's what you can spend money on. Think about your business, not in what size it is top line revenue, but think about what size it is bottom line revenue. Because I'll give you a little secret. We see hundreds of businesses a month. We see what their financials are, all in construction or manufacturing. And if we can look at the same construction contractors that are doing $5 million a year, and oftentimes they're making more than the ones doing $10 million a year. And some of those same businesses, when you look at their historic financials, maybe they're a $20 million business now, but they made 3 times as much money when they were a $10 million business. So I ask you, what would you rather own? A $10 million business that made $2 million or a $20 million business that made $500,000? The answer is obvious. So where's the gap? What happened on the way from 10 to 20 or 1 million to 5 million? It's exactly what we're talking about here on this video. You bid wrong, you missed your cost, you missed your expenses, created mistakes, created problems, and hurt your ability to perform. I hope this video helped you. I hope it gave you some insight. I hope it gave you some questions to ask yourself and ways to help fix the issues. But first, before you fix them, you got to find them. Until next time, have a great week. Take care, and God bless you.